change. I'm also a member of Codestria, so I'm really delighted that Codestria has decided to ensure that the discussions, debates, discourses on globalization and fundamentalism finds at least space and resonance within the reflections of the General Assembly. So my responsibility is really to facilitate engagement by colleagues who have submitted their papers to the Council. And the topics that they are exploring include the following. Thank you very much. Include the discussion on extreme globalization, downloading violent extremism in Kenya. The other paper is about globalization of militant Islamic movement and security in Africa. And then the third paper is on globalization and religious fundamentalism in Nigeria, problems and prospects. And the final paper will be on off-walling of Al-Shabaab terrorists between Kenya and Somalia and globalization processes. We definitely know that iterations of are contested. Some have posited the Christian fundamentalism, some have posited economic globalization as a fundamentalist expression, some have analyzed Islam expression of depending on our time, to each participant in the reflection. I'd like for this to be a highly dialogical and all of us I believe that all of us would want. So please feel free to So I'll start with you, Josephine, and I'd like to share.
Violent extremism in Kenya. I put my slides at the back. I don't know whether they're available. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's here. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I'll be presenting the study that I did. It was a desk review on globalization and violent extremism in Kenya with regard to how globalization has affected violent extremism in two ways. I'll give the discussion and then the conclusion. Violent extremism continues to receive worldwide attention since 9/11, and globalization has been linked to it, and I tried to link it to violent extremism in the Kenyan context because globalization has been seen as spreading Western cultural values, which to some extent is seen as interfering with certain cultural values, traditional African cultural values, or other world region values. It also exports religious fundamentalism, and we shall see later. And globalization has also increased the advancement in technology. which I shall be talking about in my presentation. The violent extremist activities that are contained in my study are those that are linked to Al-Shabaab, which in full is known as Al-Shabaab Harakat Al-Shabaab Al-Mujahideen, which is based in Somalia, the eastern neighbor to Kenya. So my my presentation will specifically focus on that group. And I took a two-pronged approach in linking globalization and violent extremism. First, as an ideological catalyst of violent extremism, and secondly, as a technological facilitator of violent extremism. I'd also like to make a disclaimer that globalization in my paper is not presented as the cause for violent extremism, and not all areas of technology are presented, only those areas that are related to ICTs, information communication technologies. And I reviewed this paper culminated from a desk review of 46 studies, including 8 master's theses carried out on violent extremism in Kenya. First, as an ideological catalyst, globalization leads to the emergence and spread of transnational ideological movements. Because of globalization, there is also radical jihadi coded messages that are shared across the world. And these coded messages led to the need for non-Somali fighters to join the global jihad, so that it looks like a worldwide kind of movement. So the Al-Shabaab needed foreign fighters to join them so that it doesn't look like a Somali affair, but a global affair. Secondly, another ideology that is pushed by this jihadi movement is that the war on terrorism is seen as a war on Islam. For example, the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Palestine are presented as a war on Islam. And this has also been sold to the Kenyan militia who joined the Al-Shabaab. So that the discrimination in Kenya against Muslims is considered part of wider systematic discrimination against Muslims worldwide. So it sells the idea very well to them. And why Kenya? Kenya is in the middle of this violent extremism because of its relations with the USA, the UK, and Israel, and also the role that it has played in the war against terrorism. And also thirdly, there are many soft targets in Kenya which are targeted by violent extremists, and this would give them worldwide attention, like that which was attracted by ISIS when they did their attacks in France, Turkey, and Belgium. Attacks in Kenya have been portrayed as defensive jihad, and Kenya has also been described as a theater for terrorists to push their agenda globally. For example, the Westgate Mall attack. And there have been extremist ideas which were evident in the studies that I reviewed, like the theme that assault on Islam or Christian Western invasion in Iraq, Somalia, and Syria. And then recruitment narratives, as I've mentioned, have taken on a globalized tone to attract more people. And then Muslims who reject these tenets are made to feel guilty. So my proposition is that while globalization is viewed as supporting Western civilization, and it's negative, I've put negative in quotes, negative influence, this presentation proposes that it has provided the virtual space through digital media to advance extremist activities by subscribers of Salafist ideology. Secondly, as a facilitator of violent extremism, there's increased and improved spread of technology, especially in the area of information communication, so that there is easier access to radical teachings on the internet, online blogs, social media, magazines, and videos that are easily available. Social media are highly malleable, user-created content. They are cheap relatively cheap to get. There's a lot of privacy, and sometimes it's not easy to get the source where the person is doing the things, spreading the messages from. So it has also a viral nature of spreading the message before it's intercepted by the government. And some of the examples are those: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp, blogs, and many others. Twitter has been used to update the audience. For example, during the Westgate Mall attack, it was used, the Al-Shabaab used it to attract worldwide audience, and they held hostages in the mall for close to 4 days, and they were updating people on Twitter. And when any of the accounts was closed, they were able to open another one. So that's the ease with which they were able to do the activities. And then Facebook, in one study, Facebook linked the leadership. Facebook was found to link the leadership of Al-Shabaab to smaller cells and to single groups. So it was also used to carry out communication and coordination tasks. And there was evidence of aggressive recruitment going on in the deep and dark web. Blogs had counter-narratives, social, political, and religious commentaries, taunting AMISOM. AMISOM is the African Union military that are in Somalia, who are fighting Al-Shabaab. They were also taunting the Somali federal government and the USA. These blogs were also used to radicalize, to recruit, and to announce the establishment of Al-Qaeda in East Africa. Others were chat rooms, websites, and YouTube, where recruitment and fundraising was going on. And YouTube was also used to show the success of attacks in Kenya and to make the average Kenyan panic. Then HTML sites were also used to promote terrorist activities in Kenya. We also had, there's a publication online that is known as Gaidi Mtaani. Gaidi Mtaani is Kiswahili for terrorist in the neighborhood. So it's available both in English and Kiswahili, and it was calling on East Africans to join the war, the jihadism at home. It also unmasked failures of KDF in Somalia, and they tried to juxtapose the good news only reportage of the mass media with their own portrayal of Al-Shabaab as being a formidable force and invincible. MYC, which is the Muslim Youth Council, also produced a weekly newsletter that was known as Al-Misbah with extremist content. And some of the titles included 44 ways of supporting jihad. Then the mass media has also improved their technology with time, and the Kenyan media has also given violent extremism wide coverage. Even when they report on an issue, there is inadvertent communication that is not intended that promotes violent extremism. And this has resulted in the publicity that terrorists want. Terrorists thrive on publicity, and the mass media has provided that. There are also videotapes and audio tapes. Evidence of these were there all over. And there are videos featuring Kenyan Mujahideen, which were available in Kiswahili. And this suggested that radicalization took place in video dens, apart from social media platforms. And this can be used even offline, even in homes, to follow extremist activities. Mobile phones and tablets were also used for calling, messaging, money transfers, playing video and audio clips, capturing content, downloading, uploading, and storing content, which can then be accessed offline. There's strong evidence from the studies that I reviewed that terrorism in Kenya is an extension of the global jihad, as I've explained, an anti-globalization movement, and there is an anti-globalization movement as we know it, the Western globalization that is US-led, and a globalization Salafi ideology. There is reference to Muslim marginalization in Kenya as an extension of Muslim victimization worldwide. So this lends credibility to Al-Shabaab recruitment narratives. Thus, potential recruits identify with the jihadi cause. Westgate and Garissa. I call them in short that. The Westgate Mall attack and the Garissa University attack were strong statements in the anti-Western campaign, because Westgate is known to be an upmarket mall shopping area where we have foreigners and even Americans, Israeli and British and Europeans shopping there, and they were targeted. So it attracted the international attention that terrorists wanted. Garissa University is also is associated with Western education, and so the attack on the university was seen as an attack on Western ideals. Al-Shabaab's identification with global Salafist movements offers an alternative form of globalization. So I present it as an alternative form of globalization. Global also gives Al-Shabaab and their sympathizers an alternative paradigm that helps to assuage the disillusionment that Muslims are under threat. Al-Shabaab's focus on Somali interests have gradually shifted to align with the global jihad. This is informative because initially Al-Shabaab was fighting and helping the Somali people who were suffering because of the instability in the country. But later, they shifted their focus now to sell global, the jihadi and Salafist ideology. This is informative, and I present it as an area for further research to find out, which I will talk about, to find out why this shift. They also have a large following in Kenya, and coupled with other jihadists elsewhere in the world, it gives rise to a globalized extremist population. And this has birthed extreme globalization as a contestation of the US-led globe. Secondly, the widespread of ICT's information communication technologies provides a springboard for terror-related communication in Kenya. My argument is that without the current advances in technology, which is a result of globalization, the jihadi messages and radicalization in Kenya would not have advanced to the stage where we are now. Maybe it would be slower. We should also remember that Kenya aspires to be the ICT hub of Eastern Africa. And this means that there's a wider spread, and even faster spread and aspiration to spread technologies, information technologies faster. And this could also aid the violent extremism thinking. I conclude that Al-Shabaab have used globalization as a catalyst for jihadist warfare mentality, giving rise to violent extremism, which is spread via improved technology, itself a result of globalization. And that's where I draw the title of my presentation as Extreme Globalization, Downloading Violent Extremism in Kenya. I have a few recommendations which I'll just run through. There needs to be more counter-narratives, and these recommendations are given in light of not wanting to remove the violent extremist groups from the internet. They should not be pulled down. In fact, their remaining there is good because it will be easy to like track them. So these recommendations are given in light of that they shouldn't be pulled down, but counter-narratives should be made alongside what they are saying, and the language should be attractive to the youth who are the target of the groups to be recruited, whom the groups target to recruit, the Al-Shabaab target them. Secondly, cyber safety programs could be started, and then a spit in the soup technique, which I borrow from my psychology background, where those who've joined these extremist groups and have not had bad experiences could be used to discourage others from joining. There should be ethical frameworks, especially for the mass media. When they report, they should then debrief the audience about any inadvertent communication that may have taken place. And then I also argue that the government lacks the spiritual authority to speak to people on religious matters, especially if their integrity is questionable. So this should be especially to religious leaders. And finally, a recommendation for further research is in the area where I said that Al-Shabaab has shifted their focus from Somali affairs to a global and worldwide kind of jihadi warfare. So So is it for money or for financial reasons so that they get funding, or so that they get funding from similar organizations worldwide, or is it because they now have dwindling support back home? So that is an area for further research which I wasn't able to enter into. Thank you.
I recognize that I allowed Josephine to speak for 15 minutes. If you try to balance. Thank you.
My name is Samuel Oyewole, and I will be presenting a paper titled Globalization of Militant Islamist Movement and Insecurity in Africa. In the middle of a global wave of Islamist militancy, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria have developed unique capability to promote fundamentalist ideas, movement, and violence on a global scale. Their mobilization capability have attracted recruits and other groups to pledge allegiance to them from across the world. Accordingly, many Africans have joined this group and in some cases fight under their banners, even outside the continent. Africa was the origin of 36% of the Islamic State foreign fighters in late 2014. Some of these foreign fighters have returned back to their regions to open new fronts. This, among others, have inspired many militant movements in Africa to incorporate global Islamist narrative into their initially local grievances and pledge allegiance to this movement. Using available public data, this study examined the trend of militant individuals and groups in Africa that have joined the network of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State and the security implications for the region. There's a growing concern, security concern, about militant Islamist movement across Africa. And then checking some of the available data, especially from the Religious for Peace database, it shows that Africa have recorded about 5,121 attacks, including 508 suicide attacks that has claimed the life of 46,972 individuals and injured 42,057 individuals across 30 African countries between 2002 and 2017. This is Religious for Peace Index. As a result of this, when someone looks at the expansion and the rapid development in a global Islamist idea and the implication for Africa, from few African countries that are experiencing instability in relation to Islamist movement back 2 decades ago, we now have several countries that are experiencing challenges that are related to Islamist ideas and movement. As a result of this, I look into the literature, and I discovered that most of the existing literature in this area are focused on the opportunities, the motivations, and activities of few Islamist movements. As a result of that, we have most of the literature concentrating their attention on Boko Haram, on Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, and then Al-Shabaab, while we have several other Islamist movements that have not received attention in the literature. The gap in the literature also includes the organization question of some of this movement, their capability, and the global dynamics of their operation. It is in this regard that this study aims to look at the compatibility of the motivation, opportunity, capability of this Islamist movement in interaction with the global arena and the implication for security in Africa. Globalization has been defined in different ways, interconnectedness of the world that has made the world a global village. We have different dimensions to globalization, the political, economy, social, and many other technological dimensions. Militant Islamic movements are inspired by political Islam, radical Islamism, and global jihad. The idea of political Islam comes from the idea of re-establishing the old caliphate that exists in some parts of the world before colonialism, Western intrusion. This comes with the idea of Western globalization of culture and politics, the imposition of Westphalia pattern of state system on Africa and other developing countries. An attempt to reverse this globalization brought about the idea of political Islam. Another thing is radical Islamism that believes that jihad needs to be waged in violence, using violence in extreme and radical manner instead of preaching non-violent strategy. And the idea of global jihad is to upturn the prevailing political and economic order at the global level so that the support that the Western government or the Western society are providing for Africa to maintain the status quo in this region of in Africa and Asia can be obtained. So as a result of this, we have a reaction against globalization, and global Islamist movement can be considered as one of the reaction or anti-globalist movements that we have in this consideration. Despite this issue, we can also consider globalization as a driver of radical Islamist idea, organization, and violence in recent time. We have, my colleague has just discussed about how internet, Facebook, Twitter are being used as a medium to spread radical Islamist idea. That's as a result of globalization. Organizations like Al-Qaeda and then Islamic State can now send their message across the world and receive fighters from across the world as a result of globalization. And Islamist violence are spreading across the world, even to Muslim minority countries, showing the effect of globalization. Global militant Islamist movement. The Islamist militancy as a component of global wave of religion militancy. We have, according to David Rappaport, we have 3 waves of global religion, wave of terror. And we have the anarchist wave, we have the nationalist wave, we have the Marxist wave, and we have the religious wave that started from 1970. And from 1970, we have experienced a series of gradual increment, an increment in religious wave of terrorism. And we can consider Afghanistan as the birthplace of global wave of terrorism, globalized Islamist movement. That's where Al-Qaeda was given birth to in 1988. Al-Qaeda evolved from a structure that is left by the party Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and that country was an embattled country during the Cold War that involved a lot of jihadist movement and a nationalist movement that fought to free Afghanistan from Soviet occupation during that time. But as a result, after the Soviet Union left Afghanistan, a lot of this group re-emerged and condensed. Out of the group that re-emerged is Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda built a global network that developed into what we can consider as a globalized Islamist movement. Al-Qaeda grand strategy is to reduce Western influence in Arab world or in the Muslim world. And as a result of that, by reducing that, they will be able to reduce the capability of the Arab country or Muslim country to resist the radical wave of Islamism. Al-Qaeda is not the only globalized Islamic movement in this consideration. Al-Qaeda in Iraq that evolved in 2004 also developed to Islamic State in Iraq in 2006, and from Islamic State in Iraq to Islamic State in Iraq and Syria in 2013. So from this, it has evolved from different leaders, from Abdul Muhab al-Zakawi to Baghdadi. So, and under this different leadership, Islamic State is different from Al-Qaeda on the principle of immediate transformation of the Arab world. Why Al-Qaeda look up to long-time achievement of strategic goal of transforming the Arab world into caliphate, the Islamic State believe in immediate transformation, acquisition of territory immediately, rather than deposing Western soldiers and support from the Arab world and now taking over the government of the Arab world. Islamic State is interested in immediate territorialization. So, on the issue of Hezbollah is a particular Islamist movement that have global reach, but with regional and local campaign and ideology. On the issue of globalization of militant Islamist movement, there is different dimension to globalization of militant Islamist movement. One of our, professor talked about the Scrabble for Africa in the morning, about state actor scrabbling for Africa. In this paper, I focus on non-state actors scrabbling for Africa, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State scrabbling for Africa. And looking at that, I focus on how they are recruiting individuals from Africa, foreign fighters, and apart from that, how militant Islamic groups are pledging loyalty and allegiance to them. And in that consideration, Africa has been a home, has been exporting foreign fighters since 1960s, not a recent phenomenon. But in recent time, this trend is becoming alarming. Algeria contributed close to 30,000 foreign fighters to Al-Qaeda in 1990s. So I have a table here that talks about the trend in foreign fighters for Islamist movement since 1945. In 2004, it was estimated that Afghanistan had between 1,000 to 1,500 foreign fighters. Iraqi had between 4,000 and 6,000 foreign fighters, and Syria around 10,000. And out of these, Africa has 36% of the foreign fighters in Iraq and Syria, while Sub-Saharan Africa has 1%, 170. But because of this limited number from Sub-Saharan Africa, there has been limited attention on Sub-Saharan Africa. However, the trend is more alarming than the number that is showing, because we have certain countries that are least expected on the global map of Islamist terrorism emerging on the global map. South Africa it was discovered that 23 South Africa, as of 2015, has joined the Islamic State. And then we have Mohammed Nazi, that particular group, a medical student in University of Legon, a particular preacher that was arrested in Rwanda, another Mauritanian of recruitment for Islamic State. Apart from that, we have several groups that they build their network on in Africa, and that is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Shabab. Islamic, the to sorry. Okay. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb have a lot of Islam to it. Tanzania, in DRC Congo, and in 2000, Al-Shabaab was transformed from to Al-Qaeda in Islam Maghreb, whereby Boko Haram pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, 2005 to Islamic State, and we also have different groups in Mali, in Mauritania, in Chad, in Cameroon, that are connected to Islamic State or Al-Qaeda. And as a implication of development, and the development or one of the development is that global grievances, is becoming grievances. Nigeria as a politician against poverty, but now it has become a subject of global jihad. The same thing happened in Algeria. It started against the authoritarian rule of the military and the intervention in the 1991 election, but now it has become a subject of global jihad. And also the same thing is happening in Mali. The two has transformed into a theater of Islamic State and Al-Qaeda competition for influence. And as a result of this, we have local issue, regional issue transforming into a global issue of global jihad. As a result of that, we have this trend of Islamist movement, attacks across Africa. And from 6 countries that are affected by Islamist terrorist attack in 2002, we have 18 globalization has become a driver, militant Islamist movement of capability and as global people is required.
Thank you. Lesson, I'll appreciate it. Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah. Good evening, colleagues. The title of this paper is Religious From in Nigerians and Prospects. It's actually a joint paper with Professor Godwin Akpe and myself, Miracle Ajay. Extent globalization affect religious fundamentalism or negatively. Coker and others is encouraging religious fundamentalism, especially radical Islam and neo-Talism. According to this view, prior to up to were animated by religion, that radical religious groups have claimed responsibility for all terrorist-related deaths, which has continued to grow till date. A reference was made to Al-Qaeda, a franchise, so to speak, in and rather than through the Civil War or Cold War mechanism of sponsoring states. Paradoxically, radical religious groups decision, but on the other hand, as a networking platform beyond this. It is contested that the arrival of globalization has drawn communities from their private safe zones. Conversely, others see the prospects of globalization in curbing the proliferation of religious fundamentalism. View of fundamentalism is spreading because most people are excluded from globalization, pointing to illiteracy and poverty, the real cause. That the culprit for Muslims is engendered mostly by grudges between the West and the third world countries, rather than globalization. The prospect of globalization is in curbing the proliferation of fundamentalism and what is probable than endangering them. This paper understands the complexity of interactions between religious dimensions, ways of benefiting religious fundamentalism in Nigeria. This study adds on the develops a socio-historical approach and content that it argues that integrating a globalization perspective, fundamentalism will leverage understanding for social cohesion and national integration. Globalization. Many people have already given us an understanding or definition of this. So let me not define fundamentalism. Religious fundamentalism denotes a process of unqualified, conservative standard profession of a belief system that relies on sacred canonical text, whose hermeneutics is peculiar to the group that propagates it. It is seen as an offshoot of modernity, especially technology and cyberspace, because they are seen as promoters of religious liberalism, which threaten the cultural preservation of their communities. Perhaps the identification and the description of some of the characteristics of fundamentalism will facilitate a broader conceptualization of the term. Allow us to summarize some of the major characteristics of religious fundamentalism as follows. Number one, radicalization. Adherents of religious fundamentalism adopt extreme political, social, or religious ideals. Two, the non-conventionality. They resort to alternative behavior, attitude, values, and moral standards that are diametrically opposed to the status quo. Three, multifaceted. Religious fundamentalism oppresses including religion. In fact, number 5, economic belief systems of individuals, groups, or society. Number 1, value system. We just forget belief and values in variance to certain principles. Worldviews and visions about human and society. Kate Suter clarifies that religious fundamentalism defines people by what divides them rather than what unites. Shaping global religious fundamentalism. I identify 4 principles that shaping global religious fundamentalism, namely hierarchy, patriarchy, discipline, and seclusion. This paper identified 2 types of religious fundamentalism in Nigeria, namely the radical Islam and Neo-Pentecostalism. These two types of Pentecostalism exhibit most of the major characteristics of global religious fundamentalism varying degrees. Catholic Islam pursues a social, political, and religious agenda. The Neo-Pentecostalism engages on socio-economic and religious agenda. They hide under religion to propagate their different ideologies. The radical Islam is burdened with the establishment of an Islamic state which recognizes the full implementation of the Sharia, Hadith, and Sunnah, with little or no respect for freedom of religion, gender equality, freedom of speech, and freedom of association. They avoid the earliest example of the activities of Islamic fundamentalism in Nigeria is traceable to the Sani riot in Kano in 1980, recently. In Senate, religious fundamentalism originally was the label Protestants in the First World was to defend or reaffirm Orthodox Protestant Christianity against liberal theology, criticisms, and Darwinism. Consequently, fundamentalism was a reprisal against the so-called adulteration of the Christian faith, or against radical refashioning of the historical faith by liberalism or the modernism. In Nigeria, took a new turn with the advent of Pentecostalism, which is on the practical demonstration of the Christian faith through spiritual gifts, speaking in tongues, and healing between 1970. Pentecostalism refers to the new brand of Pentecostal movement in Nigeria, whose interest is on the preservation of Christian doctrines and standards, but on socio-economic life of the people. Most of their leaders are ill-equipped with little honor. They exploit the current economic downturn of the nation and the gullible nature of the masses to advance their hidden agenda in order to amass wealth and profit. The uses of unconventional methods like faking of miracles, prophecies, charging of fees for so-called land and family delivery characterize their regular practice. The current high point of Neo-Pentecostalism is their relationship with the political class. By giving them prophecies and assuring fortune of finance to themselves, exemplified by the 2015 Nigeria election. Effects. Globalization breeds the proliferation of fundamentalist movement. On the other hand, venue for alleviating their excesses. Some of the ways globalization contributes adversely to the progress of religious fundamentalism in Nigeria include the pervasiveness of secularism and liberalism through ICTism is part of the nation. Pornography, homosexuality, and other vices are freely marketed over the internet. Religious conservatives see this development as a threat to their religious value, hence their occasional digital. In Nigeria, which is common with global experience, is the adoption of internet to disseminate information to their members. Guardian newspapers reported that Al-Qaeda was communicating with certain terrorist groups in Nigeria through email addresses. Furthermore, the Boko Haram claimed responsibility through the internet for the Christmas Eve bombings of some part of Plateau State. The growth of religion for consumerism. Many neo-Pentecostal fundamental organizations maintain a robust and elaborate media advertising for their programs and products in a manner that portrays them as commercial enterprise like Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Virtually everything is commercialized, like anointing oil, blessed handkerchief, audiovisual materials, books, and so on, as well as counting their chains of schools that cannot be afforded by an average person, including their members. Materialism becomes the yardstick for measuring success and a sign of spiritual exploit. Expansion of terrorist network. The internet is used by insurgents, jihadists, and terrorist organizations as a tool of radicalization and recruitment method of propaganda, linking Boko Haram, example, linking Boko Haram with ISIS. Fear and national anxiety. Most of the reportages from media houses in Nigeria on terrorist activities of mass murder, suicide bomb blast, and kidnapping increased tension and fear among the populace. Apparently, they have advanced the objectives of the terrorists whose interest is subjugation and intimidation. Globalization can also be religious fundamentalism. The scourge of poverty that lures people to fundamentalism is being disarmed through the emerging economies of the nation and the growth of private sectors. Many people now are better informed through better education systems, greater dissemination of information through the electronic and social media is lifting the people out of ignorance. The problem of seclusion, which is common with religious fundamentalism, is being breached. The probability of escalating terrorism has been curtailed through the tools of globalization and international diplomacy. Conclusion. Holding globalization as responsible for religious fundamentalism in Nigeria is as false as claiming that globalization is responsible for the automatic progress in Nigeria's economy. Globalization should become an inclusive process for accelerated growth, giving opportunities for dialogue and compromises. Government should drive globalization by facilitating inclusive structural reforms that can reduce fear and promote collaboration among the people of Nigeria. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mukua Mbati from Kenya. I am going to present on, my colleagues presented more.
Can you increase your volume?
The volume?
Yes, please.
Where do I increase it?
Your voice. Your voice.
My voice?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to talk about Nigeria is defining itself. I'm going to look at how Kenya responded. Thank you. How the government of Kenya has responded to instances, fundamentalism or terrorism instances. In my introduction, I give us there was an attack on Nopsis of Shabbat attacks, and the mall is one of the market malls in Nairobi where 67 people were killed. In November 2014, somewhere in Mandera, northeastern Kenya, a bus was attacked and 28 non-Muslims were killed. In April 2015, university students at Garissa University, 148 of them were killed. In July 2015, also in Mandera, people who were working on a quarry, 14 of them were killed and 11 were injured. So, and there are many other attacks, but I have just given a synopsis of the attacks. Against all these attacks, what was the government, or how did the government react, or what was the government's response to these terrorist attacks? So, the government employed some kind of it's a two-way response. One was on security, another one was on the military side. It sent its military personnel to occupy Somalia because it believed that Somalia was the source of the terrorist attacks on Kenya. On the security side, it employed a lot of some other security policy measures. One was the construction of a wall on its border with Somalia, which the distance or the kilometers which cover the Kenya-Somali border is 700 kilometers. So the government decided it is going to build a wall, a 700-kilometer wall, so that it keeps off the Al-Shabaab from Kenya. It believed that Al-Shabaab originates from Somalia. It doesn't originate from Kenya. So what I'm looking at in this government response to the Al-Shabaab, how does globalization, how do the forces of globalization make nonsense of the walling policy of Kenya's, decision to build a wall, the 700 kilometers wall? How does globalization make it nonsense? One, before that, I want to look at, first of all, what is a border, so that we may be able to understand the function of the border against how globalization has made that function to be, has undermined that function. The border has mainly two functions. One is to separate. Another one is a bridge. So separation is to separate between me and you. It's to exclude me and you. So that if I cross the border is here, I cross it, I come to your other side, then you will say you are within my border, and when you are within my border, this is what you are supposed to do. Within that inclusion or within that territory of the border, the state expresses its most kingly, let's call it a kingly, its most kingly functions. The state expresses them within given boundaries. At the same time, the border is a bridge. It connects one country and another. It allows people to cross in. It lets them in. It allows, be it goods, be it people, be it commerce, be it finance, be it everything, whatever. So, in building this, in building this border between Kenya and Somalia, the government was separating, while at the same time it was excluding. It was including, rather. It was building a bridge because it was going to let, at given points, where those people can cross in from Somalia to Kenya, while at the same time it is excluding because it doesn't want people to cross at any point. So I'm saying that borders mark or symbolize and limit the sovereign power of the state. They safeguard territorial sovereignty. They physically protect and bar those who are inside from outside threat. They symbolize control. They ensure territorial security. By preventing, stopping, regularizing, or intercepting, interdicting, or even arresting and detaining those who the unpermitted flows. So why do states build fortified borders or walls? So the state resorts to building a physical reinforcement on its boundary for defense and to stay or to manage outside threat or to reduce the contact possibilities with undesired, dangerous national elements or those who come in and this feels that they may be a threat to their security. And in building these borders or fences, they can be in the form of electric fences, they can be in the form of ditches, happen moons, or barbed wire, concrete blocks, or biometric detection systems. So as I have said, the government of Kenya decided in 2015, and around 2015 April, it started construction of a well fence covering 700 kilometers to separate it from, separate Kenya and Somalia, so that it prevents the free crossing between the two countries. So how does globalization undermine or challenge this kingly power of the state, that we have seen that the state is the supreme authority within the boundaries within which it has defined, or the physical boundaries within which it has defined itself? So those who have read the work of Arjun Badrai, I use his 5 steps through which flows flow across countries to show that the construction of the wall between Kenya and Somalia is maybe a useless government function which cannot stem what they intend to stem. So I use the 5 scopes: the ethnoscapes, the technoscapes, the financescapes, the mediascapes, and ideoscapes. Those are the 5 scapes which Badrai provides, through which globalization flows through. So let's look at ethnoscapes. Ethnoscapes is actually the actual movement of people or persons, and the ensuing changing relationships or cultures that accrue. So in building this wall, one of the things we need to know is that people migrate for various reasons. There are those who migrate as refugees, there are those who migrate as exile, for tourism, to look for a job, for trade or commerce. And therefore, globalization accelerates people's movement. And when it accelerates people's movement, it causes what is called a fragmentative effect, some kind of disturbance at its not origin, but where where people migrate to. There is a cultural disturbance, there is an economic disturbance, there is a political disturbance. So it kind of disturbs the balance where people migrate to. So the government is building this wall between Kenya and Somalia, while inside Kenya we have refugee camps. Kakuma refugee camp is one, Dadaab refugee camp is another. Though these refugee camps are not under the scope of Kenya, they're under the scope of the United Nations thank you. United Nations High Commission for Refugees, which means Kenya has no control whatsoever over its refugee, or the refugee camps. The refugee camps is not within, physically it is within Kenya, but in real, it is not under the jurisdiction of the Kenya government. It's under the jurisdiction So how does building of all prevent the terrorists from entering Somalia? People can come in as refugees, and when they are, sorry? And then we have the technoscapes. The technoscapes is an of technology. Social media, virtual trade, with technology. It has allowed, the technology has allowed the training of mental groups virtually. Click on, you'll be able to, you can bring doctrine, you can, if it's the use of weapons of mass destruction, you can. So that makes the construction of the wall useless, because you can be able to, not be able to, if you want to get training, you virtually get it on. So the wall is, and then there is finance. Buoyed by technology, we have the use of electronic money. Terrorist groups exchange capital and money through the use of mobile money. Money we have the use of chip cards, we have the use of internet software applications where money is, like if you want to send money from Senegal, you can send it from Senegal to Kenya at the click of a button. So who train on phone, they recruit you electronically, they send you money electronically, they pay you electronically. So, of this suburb. And then, secondly, we have the media. Previously, we had a called everybody is a journalist. So, the government does not control the narrative. The narrative is controlled by technology. If there is the counter narrative, there is the government narrative, and there is the counter narrative where so whatever you want, you just get it at the click of the button. So, in essence, so this has helped who are alleged to produce massive store and spread, transmit information across the geographical boundaries without any limit. The idea of ideology. Ideology is not controlled now because of the rise of because of the rise of technology. Ideologies are now, propagated online. Ideologies are now, you belong to a given WhatsApp group because it subscribes to the given ideology to which you subscribe in, and the government over that. So, how does the construction prevent of ideologies, fundamentalist ideologies between Kenya and Somalia? So, lastly, the various ways in which globalization has rendered the construction of that wall between Kenya and Somalia irrelevant. So, how do I foresee or of at least there is some control on it. To me, the governments have to align themselves to technological evolution so that which transcends territorial rigidity of conventional borderlines to allow for the possibility that the border is not merely a physical boundary. Something out there, something, sometimes imagine out there which is geared to the upstream and prevents or filters incoming flows from their points of origin. Thank you.
Speaking. So I understand you, but I also understand the passion with which you were sharing. It would seem to me that in their presentations, dimensions of the actors, the agents, the context, and the differences, and who are seen at least as some of the dominant voices or dominant actors within the processes of fundamentalism as we understand them within the continent. The other element that I thought was identified, which you in the debate may be contest or affirm, or is the idea that the conduits or the catalytic processes of fundamentalism may be economic, political, religious, or the interfaces of those. How these are expressed in the papers vary differently, but you will actually be in the process of digging with the colleagues to enhance and enunciate the actually enhance their papers is really what are the underlying theoretical and conceptual frameworks, because that might not have been as evident in your papers as maybe because of the limitations of time, and therefore that would be an important area for us to discuss. And the idea of futures and fundamentalisms within the context of globalization are also important imperatives. I'd like to invite you to engage the colleagues to comment, to ask questions, and my approach is going to be look on the left or on the right. If you're spoken, don't try to speak too many times. I'll ask others to do it. All of us must have had the opportunity. So the passion started at the left. Yeah. Yes, please, and on the. So let's take 3 questions or 5 questions, and then they respond, and then questions and comments or reflections, and then the 5, and then we'll see how much time we have. With the available to you, please. Yes. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Hello. 5 things, and if they are working, if beginning a whether is it
I was just wondering, you talked about the polarization. You have raised the theory on globalization, media escape and all that. You do not acknowledge. So I was just wondering whether you use it or try to domesticate it. And yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to protect him. He did say his theoretical basis is drawn on the work of that particular scholar. Yes, but your point still holds.
Thank you very much. I want to commend the presenters. I actually enjoyed the presentation because they actually have in mind, but I still want to ask, especially to Josephine, spoke about our internet and maybe Mr. The state actors, yes, in any way addressed, utilized technology. We all know that technology, the area of internet, social media, and all the rest to propagate their ideas. But what have been the activities, what have been the efforts of the state actors in doing this? Because your works are, you are not going to publish it together. So I believe we need to have an understanding of what they are. So the last presenter spoke about Kenyan. Very interesting, very thought-provoking. My question goes to the lady. At the end, you have some recommendations. Those are for other scientists like you or to politicians. And if it is to politicians, how do you intend to get them? Do you by chance have an uncle who is a minister, who is a director, or who is at the presidency, who can take your work? Because you know, generally, that there is no continuum. We do the research, we produce knowledge, but they are not even ready, the politicians, the leaders, are not even ready to take what you have produced. So I'm just wondering, for who are your recommendations? Thank you.
invite two more questions. Oh, it's the person coming. Miracle, I'll ask you to go.
Okay.
No, still.
Okay. There was no particular question directed to me. Let me only summarize by saying that each time we talk about globalization, people think that that is where the problem always is. And I'm thinking that the same way we look at globalization as a problem, that the same globalization can become a means of solution. So it's now left for us to know, how do we exploit the agencies of globalization to now serve as a recipe or antidote to some of these ways it has been exploited negatively. So that's why I said my paper is actually asking us, inviting us for further discussions on how this globalization should not be seen as an evil. It should be seen as an agency that can be actually helpful in curbing religious fundamentalism. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the only comment that is closer to my discussion is the one on how the state agents are making use of technology in addressing the issue of terrorism and Islamism in the context of my own discussion. I think I'm more familiar with the Nigerian counterinsurgency and that of its neighbor in the Lake Chad region. And I'm aware of a particular project, the HIGH project, a joint project between Nigeria and Israel that cost about $360 million to track, to get intelligence on internet users and others. So, against terrorism. It's mainly for that purpose of tracking internet, the use of internet to propagate Islamist or terrorist agenda. So I think it's related to the use of technology to address the issue of terrorism. Another thing that I'm aware of is the use of Nigerian satellite to track location of terrorists, although that is an issue. The effectiveness of that is debatable, but I'm aware that the use of satellite is salient in Nigerian counterinsurgency. And in 2016, Nigeria established its National Defense Space Agency that received a budgetary of around $80 million in the second year, that's 2017. So I think those are some of the issues that are relevant to the use of technology to address the concern of terrorism and insurgency in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. On the issue of state actors' use of technology, since it's come out as one avenue that violent extremists are using to radicalize and recruit, the National Intelligence Service uses the information that they get on the internet, because it was evident from the studies that I reviewed that they gather a lot of intelligence, are actually able to track down aspects. The viral nature of social media makes it possible to spread the information very fast before the government is able to intercept it. So sometimes the interventions may be reactive rather than being preventive. Secondly, the recommendations. I don't have an uncle who is a politician, and I doubt that if I had, he would listen to me. But from my study, I couldn't help but just come up with the recommendations, because it was almost obvious that these things should be done. For instance, there was not much evidence of counter-narratives on the internet. There are narratives, trainings, and even how to make a homemade bomb, all that information can be found on the internet. But there is not much that has been put to counter that kind of ideology. So in Kenya, I know of an NGO known as Life and Peace Institute that works on de-radicalization and rehabilitation of former militia. And they have done a little bit, they have programs where they help these young people to be rehabilitated, to rehabilitate them back into society and to de-radicalize them. So maybe these NGOs could also adapt such measures of writing counter-narratives and putting them on the net, or providing this information through other means. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start with the question on marginalization of Northeastern Kenya, which principally gave in to the issue of the building of the wall. So the question is, if there was no marginalization, will the wall, be able preventing the terrorist activity of Al-Shabaab? One, I would say no. Why? Marginalization, much as it provides the marginalization of Northeastern Kenya matters, it provides the reason for mobilizing against the Kenyan state. There is the assumption of trying to label or trying to stigmatize the people of Northeastern Kenya, that they are the ones who are, terrorists only. If you would follow the arrests or people who have been trained in the Al-Shabaab and they have come back and they are convinced, they have been, we have people from Western Kenya, we have people from Nyanza, we have, so really, much as the marginalization of Northeastern Kenya provides the people of Northeastern Kenya for the narrative to be able to mobilize against the Kenyan state for that very marginalization, from the other parts of the country. And for that reason, inside other parts of Kenya are not necessarily in the north region. So they won't clearly make the whole irrelevant. Secondly, I'm also the framework of Badrai Al-Jun, but somehow domesticated it to my study so that it will be able to apply. That is why I have, which he provides, through which globalization travels through, to show that really is irrelevant, because you build it, you don't build it. It's globalization, the forces of globalization are so forceful, are so be able to travel the world. Technology. The state utilizes, and this is, maybe I'll provide an example of how the state utilizes technology in trying to curb flows, in trying to curb movement, or to regulate movement of the people. And this is in terms of everybody here, as in terms of the issue of the talk is done electronically. If it's done electronically, is to sieve your data through and see if you are a threat or you are not, for actually go for the actual interview for the issue of the passport. So in that way, putting some barriers, all governments, not Kenya government, is somehow putting some kind of the movement of people across borders. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague. Wondering, for us not to find ourselves limiting our script deeper, what does it mean for us to saying economic, or at least some of the core elements of economic globalization is the ideas of deregulation, the idea that state actors actually play a nominal role in shaping decisions, policies that are actually limiting to the movements of capital, of goods and services, but also the issues of privatization elements and liberalization. This question, when we're at fundamentalism and globalization, we are looking at information and communication, the communications elements, but we are not looking at the actual systemic or these processes that have become normative or understood to be normal, which you're saying reacting to. For instance, you talk about borders. Borders were by who? For what? We engage with of borders as Africans and African intellectuals in relation to contests or questions of fundamentalism, understanding our historical, how he speaks us with borders. I'm just positing this so that our engagement is deeper than a normal person who's not and I think it's very important for us to deepen that our sites of analysis, but also what is alternative solutions. Or am I being too abstract, colleagues? You had your hand. I'll allow you, for those of us who have spoken, we'll allow those who haven't spoken first, but this is a conversation and it must be interesting. Yes, please. Don't worry, I'll pass her.
Thank you very much. His comment and question actually provoked my thoughts because I was recently invited to a meeting with regard to radicalization and terrorism in Kenya. What is the government doing? In some of those Muslim, they'll confirm I'm not a specialist in security, in some of those Muslim-dominated areas, even school children. I had a project in a school and the participants would just disappear the following school term in Isiolo. And the government found out that some of these youngsters would actually be recruited by Al-Shabaabs and they would disappear. And the government would in return harass the families. You have to tell us where your son went, you know. And parents are crying. Our children never returned back for school holidays. So the strategy that the government is using now is to use communities and people who speak the local languages, who live with those communities, to re-invite them back in the community. And I have a friend who is a journalist who one time covered stories of those who have been de-radicalized, if there's a word like that, and they have come back to the community, but they are so scared because you'd be met with a bullet. So this strategy wasn't working. It's a bullet and you return a bullet. So the first major project is called, I think, Government Counterterrorism Security something. There's a blueprint now. And the first major project to be done, and I'm aware of this because I know the people who did it, is in Kilifi and Mombasa, which has been the core of terrorism for a number of years in Kenya, done by Professor Madi Boga and Shauri of Pwani University. And they used these people who are in the community to talk to the youth, to understand their ideologies, how they got themselves there, how can we help you, how can you come back? And this is actually working because we've not had a lot of terrorism at coast in the recent past. Now, the other hotspot is Isiolo, the Meru region, where there are so many Somalis, and they're very close to the border. So they easily come, and they also trade with cat. There's a leaf that we chew and makes you high. So they're major traders with that. And we have an ethnic Somali minority in Kenya. So how do you know who is Kenyan Somali and who is Somali Somalia? And there's a whole community in Isli that you can't tell who is a terrorist and who is not, who has been integrated. And for a long time before this so-called refugee crisis in Europe, we had the largest refugee camp in the world, Dadaab. And some of these people, majority of them, came from Somalia when it became a failed state. So even if you build, the government realized, you can do a 700-kilometer wall. What about all these people who are already in the country and recruiting your own youth? So through the use of technology, they know their target, and they have decided now to do it at a grassroots level, not from, you know, coming with mercenaries and using the Amazon and just shooting them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to ask a question. I'm here as a rapporteur, but it's a team that I'm very interested in. So I would like to thank all the presenters for their papers. But I have a problem. I have the impression that you all wrote the same paper. It's very good, but I forgot to say that. But when I heard some of the reaction, I wanted to ask you, what about the main causes of the involvement of youth in violence and terrorism? Because you all took the examples of your different countries, but I didn't see where did you consider the notion of economic or social vulnerability. Because if those terrorist groups, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, etc., can come and involve our own youth in their movement, it's just because of, first of all, they are vulnerable. They don't have salaries, they cannot eat as they want, they cannot live as they want. And you know those terrorist groups, they have a discourse who is very attractive to youth. So I didn't get the point where in your different studies you consider this factor of social or socio-economic vulnerability as a main cause of involvement in terrorist group. That's true. Globalization is a driver, is a catalyst, etc. But the main cause is, for me, for my opinion, is the social and economic vulnerability. So I want to know, where do you put this factor in your different papers? Because the colleague somewhere here talked about the marginalization. If you take the example in Kenya, if there were not economic or social marginalization of some groups, I'm not sure there will be a need for a wall. So you can build a wall, but if the main cause is not addressed, you have the same effect after the wall or not the wall. So you have to consider those factors as the main causes of the problem in different countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, it is your intervention that make me raise my hand, because actually what you said is very true. And I was a bit puzzled when somebody still talking about war. Do we really have wars today? Knowing that we have the internet, we have Twitter, we have everything. Are those wars really existing? To me, I think, and I do agree with you, that the social media have just come to break down all the possible wars that we could have. And one of the problems that the governments are having is that their own hard disk is completely obsolete. Those guys are still thinking or are still using Pentium 1 or 2, where when those guys are using Android and Super Android and all the oil you can imagine. So those guys are completely afraid. They don't know what to do. They are confused because they are all old folks who are leading us, who don't want us to breathe, and they are taken aback by the social media. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the presenter first of all for their papers, and the two almost covered some of the points I wanted to highlight, because in the presentation a lot was said in terms of the security intervention from the government perspective, kind of, and very few about the possible soft approach to counter terrorism, kind of. What should be this soft approach in terms of promoting education and things like that? Because if youth are permissible to the idea of propaganda of terrorists, is because of a lack of knowledge also. So what are the, beyond the security and protection measures, from the perspective of the social scientists you are, what are the other alternatives that the government should look into to make sure that they provide appropriate solutions? And Gracien has mentioned something about who will listen to the recommendation. It's important in terms of the function of CODESRIA that we keep the entity as a real think tank to provide scientific evidence to support the work of government. In an audience like this, you have different stakeholders, some of which are consumers of what you are producing. And it's important to have that also in mind, and knowing that your intervention will not just be sleeping in the shed somewhere. There's always someone who will need and be enlightened by what you are producing. So it's important to focus on a recommendation, and especially applicable ones. Thank you.
Okay. Run for the mic because of time.
I just wanted to remind you to answer me my nationalism, Somali nationalism problem, whether it's a problem and whether in fact it's part of globalization, nonsensifying the work.
They may decide to answer or not to answer, it's okay. So yeah. So I'm thinking, colleagues, because this is not just the questions for the panelists, but there are also the questions for those of you who are in dialogue with them. So we are all asking, what are the states doing? Yet we know that due to globalization and the distributive aspects of the economy, there are some states that are poorer than the high net worth individuals in our societies. So Dangote is richer than the Gambia, Lesotho, probably, and Swaziland. And if you are discussing these ideas of fundamentalism and what state actors or other actors have to do, how do you deepen the analytics of how you define globalization, who holds power, who is able to take the decisions or stances that are enabling or facilitative to addressing these questions? My problem is if we stop at the realm of description, we then lose out the possibilities of digging deeper in order to ensure that even the recommendations, for instance, Josephine, that you want to highlight could be resourceful in transformative agenda for Africa. So for me, I think we need to dig deeper our theoretical framing, because when we do that, then our scholarship is not only at the realm of description, but it is really at the realm of digging deeper the sources of knowledge that could actually contest even the definitional dimensions we're working with. So I'd like each of you to have at least 1.5 minutes. Please, no extra time. I'll have the mic, so I'll ask the next person. You can answer any question that has been posed to you, or at least share some other insights that you think deepen what you have shared with ourselves. Thank you.
I just want to say here that no matter the achievement of science and technology, the achievements, even though they go to the moon and achieve every other thing you want to achieve through globalization, one tiny action of religious fundamentalism can destroy every aspect of it. Meaning that if the government and the learned society does not give serious attention to curbing the problem of religious fundamentalism, you discover that all that you have built for years could crumble overnight because of one radical somewhere that will just come and explode himself and explode everybody. So all the things you have built over the years will be destroyed within a twinkle of an eye. So that's why we're thinking that this subject should be given a serious attention.
Yeah, thank you. I think we received a question on socio-economic vulnerability of the youth, and another question on the soft approach to counterterrorism. I think the two questions are related. I talked about dimensions of globalization, political, social, economic dimension. They all have their way, they have different angle that channel to fundamentalism. They have their own contribution. From economic angle, poverty, inequality at the local level, feeding global grievances. No, at the point in my presentation, I recognize the fact that local grievances are transforming and becoming global grievances. So the connection between local and global is fading away. So either grievances at the local level or the global level, they are fusing together and feeding the radicalism and fundamentalism that we are experiencing. So at the level of political, we have to design strategy to address political concern. Socially, we have to design strategy that fit into social concerns. And at the level of economy, we have to design economic strategy that fit into the demand or the pressure that we are receiving from policy demand that we are receiving from the society. I think it is important to look into multiple dimensions of this concern, not only military dimension. The attack, they also have their motivation, they have their opportunities that we can look into. And the pattern of recruitment show the level of poverty in certain countries. So show the level of inequality, show the level of religious intolerance in some countries. So all these things we have to pay attention to them. The issue of at a point in time, Algeria, Morocco was sponsoring religious and was sponsoring imam to some of the West African countries to encourage counter-narrative in mosque. So these are issues that we can explore further to increase counter-narrative. It's part of the soft approach. The issue of liberalization of politics. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. On the issue of marginalization, I think I wanted to react to a question that she raised. And I think I mentioned marginalization in my paper and said that the Al-Shabaab have used the marginalization of certain populations in Kenya, especially Muslims, to link it to the global jihad. I mentioned that. And so they globalized the issue that was Kenyan, as he has said, they globalized the issue, this marginalization, and it has become like they've linked it to be part of the jihadi message and saying that it is part of the wider discrimination of Muslims worldwide. On the issue of socioeconomic deprivation of the young people, it would interest us to know that some of the people who have fought in Al-Shabaab are from very rich backgrounds. So it will be only socioeconomic reasons. For example, the gunman who killed most of the students at Garissa University was a law graduate from University of Nairobi, and he had a bank job. So why would such a person, I don't think he was economically deprived. So it is more than economic issues, okay? It's more than economic issues. And another example I would like to cite is a group of 5 students who were caught going to join ISIS from a private medical school in Sudan, one of the most expensive schools in Sudan. So such students who are in such an expensive school may not necessarily be from poor backgrounds. So it is more than just economic issues. Thank you.
Thank you for assisting me to answer some of the questions, especially on marginalization and Somali nationalism. When we talk about Somali nationalism, and for that matter, when we talk about ethnic nationalism, generally in Kenya or in Africa, then we have to allude to marginalization. Because how does the ethnic nationalism come about? The group has to feel some kind of exclusion. They have been excluded from the rest. And how have they been excluded from the rest? Then that marginalization comes in. And when the marginalization comes in, that is when they feel now we are not like the rest, we are not receiving services like the rest, and so we have to, you know, they respond or they react to this kind of the felt, be it real or be it imagined organization. So the Somali nationalism you are talking, I don't know if the one I'm imagining is the one is the one about the perceived marginalization of, be it real or perceived marginalization of the Somali community, and how the Somali community have mobilized around the issues of that marginalization to be able to propagate, maybe some of them, not all, to be able to propagate the issues of Al-Shabaab. I have written briefly about that in my paper, how the people feel that the government has not been, you know, responsive to their needs all through, and through that they somehow use that to be able to mobilize themselves into to have a reason why they should, you know, if there is a reason to join Al-Shabaab, then the reason is provided because the government has not been responsive to them. So, secondly, there was, you talked about the works of, remind me the name, please, professor from Technical University of Mombasa?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yes. Pwani University. Yeah? I have looked at their most recently published works. There are five scholars, and they published their work most recent, as recent as maybe some 3 or 4 months ago. And they actually talk about they talk about the issue of the government response. The government gets kind of labels the Somali community, goes to Isli, rounds them up, and puts them in a concentration camp. So what would be the reaction, the general reaction, even if they were not Al-Shabaab and they have been put in a concentration camp? So I have looked into that, and maybe I wouldn't be able to explain that, but I have looked briefly, because mine was not to look at the reason for Al-Shabaab, but to look at how the government response is generally rendered irrelevant to globalization.
Thank you, Mukue. Thank you. Can we give the panel a round of applause, please? I'd like to thank you all for the insightful comments, questions that you raised, and to thank them for the papers that they have presented. It would seem to me that there is a sense of coherence between the paper that was presented on the first day in the panel, in plenary, around the context within which we live, the contestations of ideas and meanings of what it means to being human, ideas that the socio-economic, political, and other contexts are creating in this quest for meaning for life, and the role of, or the place of Africa within the global community. I'm requesting that it is very important for us to drink from our own worlds, because then our analytics would even be deeper than when we just look towards the north for insights. I'm really grateful for you enabling us to understand even in more depth the ideas of globalization and fundamentalism. And thank you very much for your papers. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you to all those who participated, whether by your documentation through audiovisual processes, or the rapporteurs or members of staff who were accompanying this process. I'm really grateful. Thank you, and I wish you fantastic time at the assembly. We are actually at 2029. I wanted to finish exactly on time. Thank you very much.